Welcome to Workshop Topics, refurbishing a Myford Ml7R lathe. This is part 5. Repairing the paintwork, fitting new drive belts and making a new lead screw key. This is an area of the lathe that you never see, it's round the back. It's the countershaft housing, but that doesn't mean that I don't need to repair the paintwork. I've shown this clip in a previous episode. What I'm doing is removing any flaky paint. But as I also mentioned in the previous episode, this is more than paint. The entire casting is skinned in some sort of filler, and I'm going to reskin it using JB Weld as I showed in a previous episode. Here's the last of my JB Weld. I mixed up sufficient to repair this part and some other parts of the lathe which were damaged. This is a gratuitous shot of the JB Weld curing round the back of the countershaft housing. After 24 hours had elapsed, I sanded the JB Weld to a very smooth finish ready for painting. I also filled this casting with some JB Weld, and here I'm rubbing it down, once again ready for painting. I decided to buy some very good quality paint. This is from Craftmaster and it's really good stuff. The only trouble is there's more than one Myford Grey. This is the earlier Myford Grey colour, which is an entirely different colour to this Myford that was made in the 1980s. It's not a massive issue though. I've got quite a good eye for colour, so I just wiped off this paint and mixed my own. And I think I got quite a good match in the end. This is the Craftmaster Grey mixed with some Humbrol Grey, with a small amount of Humbrol White and a smaller amount of Humbrol Dark Blue. And that seemed to get me to the colour that I needed. Once the lathe was thoroughly clean, I went round all the areas that needed just touching in with this special mix of grey paint. Sometimes I will mix paint in an existing small Humbrol tin. For this job I did need a larger amount of paint, so I mixed it in a plastic container. The Myford Ml7R that I bought in the 1980s was green, and I seem to remember it didn't come with a hand wheel. I had to buy it as a separate part. And also I think it's the same with this lathe, but unfortunately it was a green hand wheel that was fitted, not a grey one. I've thoroughly cleaned the hand wheel, even though it looks a bit dirty it isn't, and it's degreased so I can paint directly onto the metal. And here for the painting enthusiasts is once again a gratuitous shot of the paint drying. In this clip I'm showing the JB Weld, and it's quite a good colour match with the original paint. I spent quite a lot of time rubbing this part down, then I painted it and it looks good, but I forgot to press record on the camera. I do that sometimes, there's a lot to think about. In this clip I'm fitting the back plate. This supports a safety cover to stop you sticking your fingers in the change wheels. I ran the lathe motor for quite a long time and it's sounding really smooth, very sweet indeed. I'm glad I didn't change it for one from the Far East. In this clip I'm test fitting the quadrant that supports the change wheels. These parts are running out of sequence, but I just needed to include them in the video. This is after I've fitted the safety cover over the motor pulley and the pulley to the countershaft. There's quite a complicated reduction gear drive from the headstock spindle gear down to the lead screw. But it doesn't feel right, and do you know why it doesn't feel right? It's to do with the first pulley that drives the gears, because the metal gear that's driven by the Tufnol gears is not a Myford part. The previous owner of this lathe obviously had some difficulty getting the feed to run slow enough. The main point of a change wheel system is so that you can change the gear ratios to cut predetermined screw threads, but it also drives the lead screw to give a longitudinal feed when generally machining. I discarded this non-Myford part, fitted the proper part, which came with the lathe anyway, and with the extra 2 gears fitted in the lower part of the quadrant, the speed of the traverser is perfect. If you have a Myford lathe, I would recommend that you try and buy Myford parts because they usually fit and they work. Here is the drive belt from the countershaft to the spindle. And why has it been cut in half? Well, I did this, and that's because one of the ideas I had which didn't work was to remove the entire countershaft assembly, including the motor, to lessen the weight. It proved so difficult to remove the countershaft assembly. In the end I just removed the motor, so all I had to do was chop the belt. And the long belt between the pulley and the countershaft, I actually lost that. It's in the workshop somewhere, but the workshop is in a bit of a state at the moment. There are things everywhere. I need to fix the belt on my Boxford lathe, so I thought it was a good idea to go and buy some of this. I went to a local supplier on an industrial estate near to where I live, and the man behind the counter asked me how much I needed, and I said quite a lot. He said, "Will 5 meters be okay?" As I needed a new centre belt for my Boxford lathe and 2 belts for this Myford, I said yes, that will be fine. This stuff is very expensive. It's about £30 a metre. I wasn't expecting it to be quite so expensive, and I need actually more than 5 metres for a couple of other jobs. There are, of course, a wealth of cheaper alternatives, but I think this is the best. It's made from polyurethane, and I tried to destroy one of the links, and it was impossible. And you even get a special tool with it, which allows you to rotate the parts that fasten it together. I'm actually going to do a separate feature on this stuff because I like it so much. When you first start working with this system, it is not that easy to put together. It's actually quite difficult, but like anything else, there is a knack to it, and after a while, the penny dropped. In retrospect, I didn't need to buy quite as much of this. I could have used a standard V-belt to go between the motor pulley and the countershaft pulley. But once it's fitted for life. I think this will easily outlive me, easily. When you first run these belts, they appear quite noisy, but after a while the noise subsides as they sort of adapt to the job. When my son-in-law and myself were dismantling the lathe, I removed the half-round key in the keyway in the lead screw. I remember Rob saying, "Make sure you don't lose that bit." So I put it in the box with my Allen keys, but I couldn't find it. It must have evaporated. I measured the slot and turned a disc on the lathe out of silver steel, which is quite hard, and here I'm marking the position where I need to trim more of it off so that it will hold the gears in place. I just ground down to the felt tip pen line using my 1-inch belt sander, and it's a really good fit, so both the spacer and the gear are now keyed onto the shaft. And once I'd tightened the bolt on the locking ring, that was it. Time to test the system and see whether the saddle moves when everything's put into gear. And as you can see here, it appears to run very well, but the lead screw is going too fast relative to the speed of the lathe. To get a good finish on a small lathe, I would prefer a finer longitudinal feed. I'm only going to use this Myford for making very small parts, and owing to the ease of changing the speed, I will be using it for polishing as well. With the help of a friend of mine, we moved the lathe from the table where I was working on it to where it's going to live. It's still temporarily screwed to the pieces of plywood. I took the chip tray to a man called Mark from a company called Powder and Paint to have it blasted and powder coated. The gear train is fitted with 100% Myford components and an extra gear in the drive, and now the longitudinal traverse is exactly what I want relative to the spindle speed. All I need now is a quick change tool post, and I've just bought an original Myford part from Myford Limited. As I thoroughly cleaned the lathe, I painted in between the bed. This colour is called buff. It's a sort of a yellowy colour. This lathe is in very good condition, both mechanically and cosmetically. It makes my old Boxford lathe look so bad, I think I may renovate that. But not in this video. That's it for this one. Stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.